Welcome to Unleash Your Inner Goldilocks, how to get it just right. Thank you so much for joining us for another insightful and truly invigorating conversation. I'm excited about today because our guest today is a woman I respect, a woman I share ideas and look at ways to solve problems in the world of education. So she's a colleague, she's a friend, and somebody who truly inspires me and inspires others around her. And I am absolutely delighted to introduce Dr. Tyisha Noise to the Goldilocks community. Welcome, Dr. Noise.
Morning. Thank you for that warm welcome.
It is an absolute delight. And as we kick this off, you have been in the world of education in the Los Angeles area. You work with not-for-profit organizations. You make a lot of impact in so many different ways. And you go places normally educators don't go because you see with your heart and you want to make an impact, right? So what I want to start this conversation off with is to ask you, what in you fuels you to do all of that? Because being an educator can be very transactional, it can be a job, but for you, it continues to transform you and you transform everybody around you every day. What makes it so?
Wow, that's a beautiful question. So I'm a Christian, for better for worse, but I'm, the kind of Christian that has two basic beliefs, love God, love people. And I think so one, I was raised here in Los Angeles, in a circumstance where statistics were not in my favor. But faith taught me the idea that I had purpose. And I have been with children and around children, even when I was growing up, so my entire life. But nothing feels as right as when I'm serving children and families. And so for me, the drive is a sense of purpose. Um, a good education transformed my life. It transformed the trajectory of my family. It has given me a sense of purpose, a sense of accomplishment. It has given me joy that I cannot describe or put into words. And I want that experience and opportunity for every child who goes to school. I believe that that's possible. I believe that's what school should be. School should be a place where children go to have their talents and their hearts nurtured and watered for them to explore who they are and discover the world around them and discover their purpose, not just reading or writing or arithmetic, but something greater than that. Why am I here? This is right, to find the thing. Like, I wake up every day thinking this is the thing I was made for. But what if every child in school felt like that? What if everybody felt like that at work every day? And I think for me, that's the driving force every day, is to create a world where children feel purposed, right? And they feel like they live in a world that was designed to help them cultivate their own purpose.
That is such a beautiful approach because it also then automatically allows you to create a safe space for the children, a place where they can be curious, they can be inquisitive and dig into things without, getting their hands slapped. And they can be themselves and explore and learn without worrying about, am I looking right? Am I sounding right? Is my dress right? Right? So all of these things are so important for children, but we don't create that environment for every child. And this is why you and I connect, right? I come from a belief that they're all our children. They're all my children. I need to do something for every child who comes into my life, whether they are 2 or 22, right? They're all somebody's child. So, as an educator, what kind of environment are you building in your school system to make that possible?
a lot of the work that I'm getting to do in LA County right now, and actually throughout the state, is about culturally responsive and trauma responsive education systems. And I think I want to start, I think about them as you can't really be culturally responsive if, or you can't really be trauma responsive if you're not culturally responsive. And I say that because every place has a memory, right? When we show up as educators in any community, that community has memory, it has a history, right? The students who step into a room with us have a history with the system of education and the system of the world around them. And if that system has not been kind, if it hasn't been respectful, if it hasn't been supportive, if it hasn't been inviting, it is our responsibility to heal that gap so that children can engage in the ways that they need to. And so I think a lot about trauma responsive education. Before I became an educator, I like to think of education as my second career. I actually started my career in mental health, working with students who were on the verge of being expelled from the system for their behavior. And it was the first time in in LAUSD here in Los Angeles where schools had started saying we can't just keep disciplining children for behavior and sending them to the school next door. Because what happens is if you start suspending and expelling children in the second or third grade, by the sixth grade, they've missed so much school they can't read. So how do we do something different? And LAUSD went through a stage where what they were doing for children, younger children who were up for expulsion, was saying to families, if you will engage in treatment for your child, treatment for your family, then we will allow them to stay within the boundaries of the district. Otherwise, we're going to expel them from the district. And LA County is enormous. It is 4,083 square miles. It's a long distance from any point to the end of the district, if you know what I mean. And so I had the opportunity to work with families who were scrambling to a certain degree to figure out, how do I help my child learn the behaviors necessary to be safe in school? And what it taught me about what we are now seeing in school more and more, and what we're now more willing to talk about, because that was 25 years ago, um, is that for years we've told people to leave things at the door. When you come to school, leave your other life at the door. We say it to educators too. Leave your house, leave your home or whatever else is going on outside at the door. But that's not humans. Humans don't function that way. And so a lot of the conversations I get to have, and when I'm training adults at this point, because that's mostly what I do every day, is we're having this conversation about how do we create an environment in a classroom that no matter where a child is coming from, it is safe, right? It's emotionally safe and it's physically safe. And the only way to do that for every single child is to know them. You have to know who they are. You have to know where they're coming from. You have to learn that history that they bring into the room with them, whether that's last night's history and I didn't have anything to eat, or that's 5 years of history of being diagnosed with needs that show up on an IEP and being shuffled from school to school to school because nobody wants to pay for the services that this child needs, and being underserved for long periods of time. And so I think a lot about that, about how do we equip and set educators up for success so that they can give students what they need. And I think one of the biggest challenges, particularly in underserved communities that we're dealing with, is a lot of new educators, so not a lot of folks with a lot of experience, but also the trauma responsive conversation in most cases isn't happening for educators until after they get credentialed and show up in schools. It's not something that we're talking about when we educate educators. It's something we have to train them to when they get there. And the truth is science has taught us, right, that I cannot access higher order thinking of my prefrontal cortex until my amygdala has calmed down. So as long as I am under threat, I can't access. It's not I don't have the ability. It's that I can't access the ability to do my best and deepest, most powerful thinking until I feel safe. And how do we help educators create that environment in every classroom, in every hallway, in every school, everywhere? That is the work I try to do every day.
Wow, that is amazing. And it is a tireless task, keeping in mind everybody going in to become trained to be teachers, they themselves have unresolved trauma. So we can only give what we have. And if they haven't had the opportunity to heal through their education process, then they are bringing their unresolved trauma into the classroom. And now we have a compounding effect in the classroom.
Yeah.
And this is exactly what I see when I'm doing work in the Caribbean.
Mhm.
And teachers are mostly women in any culture. And women related trauma, society doesn't even acknowledge that they're trauma.
Absolutely.
And women are told, suck it up, deal with it. You're supposed to be patient. You were wired for this. You were born to, suffer
Suffer.
through all of this because in my language, we would use the word karma, but this is how you were created. You're a woman. This is your place in life and deal with it, right? And so as a woman, as a mother, as a teacher, and then as a socialite, social member, there's so much trauma on women. And now they're with children and they have to handle that trauma too. At what point does it become too much? And what is the society's responsibility and the masculine hierarchy's responsibility to create an environment because it's their sons also who are getting raised this way. It's not just the daughters.
Oof. I love it when you ask the good questions, Dr. Kaz. What is our responsibility? Um, so many layers and levels. I think I would start, particularly for educators. I think our first responsibility is we need to begin to treat educators and educate educators in many ways the same way we do counselors, social workers, therapists, and those who study to be psychologists. Once upon a time, I thought I was going to be a therapist before I became a teacher. And I remember when I was working on my master's in clinical psych, one of the first things they said to me is that if you're going to be a therapist, if you're going to treat other people, then you should be in therapy, period. Like there was no wiggle room about that idea. It was that is the standard of practice, with the understanding that you can only hold so much trauma before it impacts you, right? We've read all the research, right? The body keeps the score, right? The body remembers. And so the first thing we've got to do is acknowledge the weights of what we have asked educators to do. We have asked them to be therapists and teachers and firefighters and God and police officers, right, in the world that we live in a world where there's also massive school shootings, right? Kids come to school with trauma, and then the world is creating circumstances that add to and compound that trauma, right, all the time. And so one of my co-authors, I had the privilege of recently being a co-author on a book called Reducing Stress in Schools, which is all about trauma responsive schools, right? And understanding, right, the neurosequential model. And part of that conversation, right, is we have to do for educators what we need them to do for children, right? We need to pour in something so educators have something to pour into children. And we have asked educators for too long to pour from an empty cup. We don't care what shape you're in, long as you show up for work. But it doesn't work, right? And also, we're asking too much in terms of the number of children, right? The more we know, we understand that more and more education has to become more and more personalized and more individualized for children to reach their highest and best potential. In order for that to be true, we've got to lower class sizes, but also we've got to offer therapy or require therapy to educators while they are in their process of being educated, right? And then encourage and offer for free therapy for educators as long as they're in the classroom, because there's no version of the world where you see the kind of things that educators see and it doesn't cause you harm. I am a living witness to that. I have experienced at least two major depressive episodes, and I didn't even know they were happening. I just knew I was exhausted and I felt miserable, even though I was doing the thing I loved. And I couldn't reconcile it until I went to therapy. And my therapist was like, no, you're having a major depressive episode and going to work every day. And it was very eye-opening for me, right? To think, this is what I love. I love my community. I love my kid. Like, how could I be depressed? And understanding that depression, for example, um, reserves the right to be as neurochemical and physical as it is mental and emotional, right? That you can exhaust yourself. You can pour so much out that there is nothing on the inside, right, left to pour. But educators can't function that way. There's no version of the world where any adult walks into a room full of children and doesn't have to give something. It's not possible, at least not to do it well, not to do it safely for children, not to do it in ways that our children deserve. You can't walk in and pour from empty. And there's no version of the world where you walk into a room full of children and they don't need something. And so our responsibility, one, is to pay educators. That would be great. Because it reduces a great deal of stress. One, we need to prepare them well. And that includes helping them heal before they step into classrooms where they are going to be asked for more from the inside of themselves than they've ever given anyone, ever. Children will pull out of you what they need if it's there. The issue is something has to be in there and it has to be uncovered and available, right? Because you can be a gold mine covered in rock and soot because you're dealing with your own trauma, but then we're still unavailable for children. That's not the highest and best. It's not what they need or deserve, but also it's not healthy for educators. We'll also continue to burn them out. So if we don't prepare them, trauma responsive practice, understanding of the neurosequential model and neurology of children and adults, right, and mental emotional health, social emotional learning, if we don't give them if we don't equip them with those tools before they step into a classroom, we are failing them. If we don't make sure that they have access and encouragement to go to therapy, to attend regularly and space in their schedule to do that, we are failing them. Also, we need to pay them. We need to pay educators a living wage, like the professionals that we expect them to be, because that also reduces stress, which reduces the likelihood of them being unavailable and minimizes their exposure to trauma. We know that poverty increases the likelihood of exposure to trauma, right? And so we can resolve a lot of those things for educators, which, like you said, are mostly women, if we can do those three things.
I totally hear you. We live in a economic construct where women-led professions are the least paid.
We do.
And women then have a second shift, and our second shift, globally, we produce work, we produce output. If we put a monetary value, is worth $1 billion a day. That is the value women add to society, unpaid. And then when we go to work, our professions are minimized in terms of financial remuneration. And when we are in professions like mine, women are still underpaid for the same job men would do, right? So we live in a masculine construct. And I hear what you're saying. And I'm going back to my childhood. I grew up in the middle of a genocidal war as a Hindu, educated in a Catholic convent school. And the way the nuns handled this is they actually paired kids up. And I had a Muslim classmate and a Christian classmate who sat on either side of me. And our job was to make sure we made each other was okay. And because neither of them come from the language we study in, we study in Tamil in Sri Lanka. So the Muslim classmate talks Arabic and prays in Arabic. My Christian classmate goes to church and prays in English, but we all have to study in Tamil. So I also learned that the home culture, the home language, all of this affects how they perform in school. So then what I learned is, okay, so I can't help my friends in class, so I'm going to hang out with them after class. And I remember helping my Christian classmate prepare for our 10th grade public exam. And she had such a hard time understanding biology and the cross-sectional diagrams, but I knew she loves to bake. And so I told her mom, we are going to take over the kitchen for a whole couple of hours. And then we took all the utensils in the kitchen, put them where we can see. We kept the book of the cross section of the skin, and we reconstructed the skin cross section with baking utensils. So the big baking sheet was the cross section of the skin, the big spatula that you mix the butter with, that was the hair follicle. So we constructed the whole thing. And once we did that, it made sense to this girl because we weren't talking in biology terms. We were talking in a way that it made sense to her, and she loved to bake. And lo and behold, for the exam, that was the question that came. She aced it. And everybody wanted to know how she did it. And she said, we baked the night before. And then she explained, right? So whether we realized it or not, the nuns had the foresight. We're in a war zone. We don't have trauma therapy. We don't have therapists. We don't know when we're going to live or die. But in the middle of all of that, they had the wherewithal to give us that kind of a support structure and teach us how to be that for each other. And I'm talking from 5, 6, 7 years old. To this day, we're all friends, right? 50 years later, in different parts of the world. So I am totally hearing what you're saying. And it has to become cultural. It can't be one person, one institute doing this, because now when the child goes home, the home is still trauma filled. The community is still trauma filled. What can the adults in society outside of the school system, what can they do? And especially the men in power. There's a difference between men in power and men living in their place of power, right?
Mhm.
So, how do we get men in power, I guess, to shift to their place of power so that they can truly play the role of the protector? Because the biggest concern men have today is women's empowerment have taken away their protective rights. But right in front of our eyes is an opportunity for every man at home, in society, in school, at work, to show up as the protector and perform that function. It is not with guns. It is not with money, but it is emotionally and psychologically showing up in their place of power. How can we create that shift?
I don't think anybody has ever asked me that before. I think it begins. I teach a course, right, called Cultural Proficiency, and we talk about in order to be culturally proficient, which is not really about having a deep understanding of every culture on earth. It really is about having a deep understanding of yourself and a deep acceptance of your own humanity with its strengths, faults, and frailties, and then being able to step into space with other humans and create the same kind of space for them. And I think men, right, we don't discuss this, right, but men are almost as traumatized as women by the system that they have created, right? If you're not sitting in the top, let's say 10 or 15%, right, of the sort of masculine triangle of accomplishment, the rest of them are traumatized too, right? This system is traumatizing in both directions. Right now, there's somebody sort of holding the baseball bat, and it appears that somebody is being hit with it. But the truth is, as a human, if you've ever harmed anybody you care about, that feeling that you have when you realize that somebody that you love is hurt by something you did, said, or caused, and that sort of rock you feel in your gut, that aching, that gnawing, we need to help men get back in touch with that feeling when they think about who they were at the ages of the people that we served in schools. Men have been through this system, they have survived it. And nobody's ever said, I once heard a long time ago, somebody said that you can't experience emotions you don't have words for. Now, the truth is, you can experience them, but there is a great deal of power in naming a thing because once I can name it, then I can find a solution. I can call it a problem or not a problem or whatever, and then I can seek a solution. Until I can name it, though, right? It's just this ominous sort of thing. Men have been disconnected from their emotional side. I won't even call it their femininity, from their emotional side. And because of it, it is costing everyone, them and us, the people they love, the people down the street, the people who work in their companies and organizations, the people they supervise, all the way down to the children in schools. It is costing us that men have been required by the world to turn off a significant portion of who they are that makes them empathetic and understanding. We've got to help men tap back into their own empathy. They've got to tap into their own inner children, into their inner selves, into their inner lives. How many men are living lives every day that look successful and they are miserable? They don't like what they do. They might like what it buys, but they don't like what they do, right? And so I think it starts there. This is an inside out. Healing is an inside out journey for everyone involved. I also think what was powerful about the story that you shared was this idea. You said, in the middle of a war zone, The nuns knew that the best gift that they could give you was connection, was relationship. They also knew that giving you that was going to shatter the idea of dichotomous thinking, right? It was beautiful. Like you made the note that they gave you three people instead of two, right? Because two creates a dichotomy. And in the US context, because I don't know if this is true everywhere, I imagine it's true probably in some Western European countries. We talk about everything as either or. And either or, I had a psychologist supervisor once, and she used to say, you always need more than two options, otherwise you'll be bipolar. And I think she was right. And I think when we think about healing the communities, right? The healing that we need as a nation, right? What we need in schools are a microcosm of the world that we live in. And so what we need in schools is really a reflection of what we need as a society. We need each other. We need fully whole, healthy, healed humans who have a sense of purpose, who create and cultivate other healed, whole, healthy humans with a sense of purpose. But if we can't get those in power to tap into their own need, their own humanity, right? Their own inner children, their own desire, even if we could help them tap into what they want for their own children, we could help them see differently. But we like to have our conversations behind screens with PowerPoint presentations filled with numbers. And numbers are a sliver of the story of what needs to happen. And I understand we have to quantify goods and services because this is a capitalist society and that's got its own issues, and I won't get into that because arguably capitalism seems to fuel trauma and things that create trauma, right? We need to create in schools what the nuns created for you was this idea that this is about us, not you or me, us. There is no us and them, there is only us. And so, what are we going to do with and for each other so that everybody can be safe and healthy and pass their class? We've got to do the same thing for educators. Our education system, because we live in a capitalist society, is built to teach people to compete when the truth of the matter is, at this point, even in the United States, more of the humans in the United States come from cultures that are communal than they do from cultures that are individualistic. But we shove children into a system that demands their individualism when what they need more than anything else in the world right now is community and connection. Many countries for many years have lived full lives with healthy societies without always having to compete.
Mhm.
How do we help men see? We don't need them to compete with each other about what they do for us. We need them to show up in their full humanity. We need them to feel us. And not necessarily just in a touchy-feely way. I mean, if they need a little science, there's a whole lot of brain science to this conversation about men understanding that their strength and their power is leveraged when they stand up in rooms and fight for women who have been on the bottom of a power structure this entire time. When they are willing to take and raise more than their sticks, they're willing to raise their voices for fair and equal pay, for benefits that make sense, for systems that make sense for other humans. 40 children in a classroom 4 or 5 hours a day with a person who might get 45 minutes a day to plan that work doesn't make sense. It doesn't build community. Intellectually, it doesn't even make sense. We're going to ask you to be at work for 7 hours. 45 minutes of that roughly is a break, or breaks between classes, but we're only going to give you 1/6 of your time to plan. And every period you see between 25 to 40 humans. That's what secondary school is like right now. What are the needs of 25 humans in the most anxious generation that we've ever seen in the world? With kids who are still recovering from their gaps in learning produced by COVID. And then if we layer that any one of those children, roughly right now, 40% of children in the last year in any classroom in the United States right now have had at least one adverse childhood experience in the last year. And we know that two or more exposures to adverse childhood experiences is when we begin to see an impact on their academics. This is who is walking in the classroom with our teachers every day. And we want them to sit in a room and teach 25 or 35 or 40 of those minds. I need men to show up and break the system because it's already broken. So they need to go ahead and dismantle it as it is and rebuild a system that works. That's where we need their strength. I need them with some sledgehammers and um some saws and some things to break the walls down so that we can have full human conversations. And human conversations aren't just art or science, they have to be both, right? It's not just practical or and financial, it has to be all of those things. I need them to break down the walls between the pieces and parts of this system that need to be brought together so we can address the whole humanity of children and the people who serve them. Because people who serve our children are shaping the world that we're going to live in, and they are worth it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I could talk with you for hours, but before we go any further, two things. I want you to share how people can get a hold of you. I will be sharing your LinkedIn profile with them. And then I'm going to open this up for, I know Robin is chomping at the bits to ask you a question.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm Tyisha Noise. My current job, I work for the Los Angeles County Office of Education. You can find me on LinkedIn. My first name is Taisha. It's Tyisha, but my last name is Noise. Like make a lot of noise. And what I can promise you for sure is if you just stick noise in any search engine, probably I'm likely to come up. I'm one of the only noises I've ever met. So that's an easy way to get in contact with me on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I'm loving it. I am so inspired. I'm actually out of town and on my way, but I pulled over so I could ask a question. So I absolutely loved what you said that the teachers, when they're being trained, when they're first being trained as a teacher, need to learn this, social emotional intelligence and dealing with trauma and all of that, as opposed to it being tacked on as an add-on after they've gotten their training. And so how can we go about changing the training system to include that? And then a second question, which you may or may not want to get into, but how are you dealing with all of this in the current political environment? And then I'm going to turn my face and sound off and keep driving, but I am listening to you.
Thank you, Robin.
Thank you, Robin. Okay, how do we fix it? I think part of it begins with a collaboration between offices like mine. We are technically a public agency that supports schools. So offices like mine collaborating with universities um, to ensure that they've got the most robust and well-designed curriculum for social emotional learning, and then helping those who run schools of education look at where this kind of information can be integrated into the current curriculum, right? When typically, right, in education, when we teach things like methods, right, we have methods for every subject. And then there's usually like a course or set of courses around classroom management. And that's probably the most wise place to put those things, right? Would be where we discuss how we manage a classroom and how we manage behavior, right? And so I would argue that that's probably the best place to put it, but I think it's going to require, as Dr. Kaz would like to say, right, a little public-private partnership, right? Universities have got to get in and get connected to public agencies like mine, county offices of education in the state of California. There are 58 county offices of education, so there's a lot of us running around here. And then connected to nonprofits who are currently designing social emotional learning. These folks, many of the best ones I know are in schools, training educators, having conversations with educators every day. Some of them even coaching educators live in classrooms on how we enact, how we begin to embody what we know in the science about neurology, right? The more that we understand the regulation of nervous systems of humans, right, the better we are able to practice well, right? Social emotional learning at the end of the day really is about brain science, is about understanding what are the elements in any space required to create the peace and the calm and the comfort and the connection for humans, right? To come out of their reptilian brain, to come out of fight or flight or freeze or fawn, right, into right the fullness of their intellect and to be available for learning. Adults need it and students need it. And we and what's great is that it's based on science. And so it's the kind of thing, it's not just magic. It's the kind of thing that we can teach and practice. And so there are excellent organizations, particularly here in California right now, who are able to help schools do that work and able to help schools of education think about how to integrate that work into their schools. And then you have folks like myself and organizations like ours, public agencies who are designed to serve schools, who are beginning to build curriculum and facility around how to train educators in this area as well. And so we've all got to work together. And now I've got to think, oh, rats, I forgot the last half of Robin's question.
Last half of Robin's question was, given the current climate, where do we go?
I'm very privileged. I'm extremely privileged. So I'm going to start off by saying that, right? Because I am in the state of California where I have a superintendent of public instruction. I have a county superintendent who have both said what's right is right, no matter what the political climate says. And so we will put our heads down and we will continue to do what we believe to be right by children and adults in our agencies and organizations. And then we're going to fight, right? Where we have to, put our money where our mouth is. Everybody I know, everybody's attorneys are working overtime right now. Lawsuits have been filed from the state level, from the county levels, from private organizations. I was just on the phone with some friends from UCLA the other day. Every other day they are in full day meetings with attorneys filing lawsuits. And so we fight. We fight by continuing in the work, and then we fight on the legal front by calling out fascism and a robbery of our rights to freedom of speech and press and thought and idea, right, on a legal standpoint. And then, very important, we do our best to create safe and healing spaces for adults who do this work so that they can continue to be replenished in the work. This work can be overwhelming. It can be draining. It can be exhausting. Someone asked me during a presentation the other day, they were like, well, after all these years, how are you still doing this? And what I tell people is the honest truth. I give my very best in every opportunity that I can. And when I begin to feel drained, I take a step back and I give myself the time and space to be refilled and replenished. And I have a really good therapist. Her name is Roberta. Listen, Roberta and I have been through a lot of things together, right? And so I think it's all of those things, right? Rest in a capitalist society is also a revolution. And so we've got to do that, right? Doing what's right when the people with the greatest power in the nation say it is wrong is a revolution, right? And then the fight, taking it to legal, taking it to the streets, taking it to a rally, that's also revolution. And I think we can sort of fund, right, or spark revolution in those regards from whatever seat we sit in.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nois. This is why I love talking to you, and this is why we're friends, right? And there's so much to do. There's so much to do. And as women in coming from our place of power, we're also trying to help the men in our lives, in different facets of our lives, get back to their place of power so that they can show up as our partners. This is not a journey we can take alone. And so thank you personally and professionally for continuing to take this journey with me. And I cannot wait to build the things we're building. And thank you for coming to this Goldilocks community and sharing with us on our journey of what it should be to getting education just right. And to our audience out there, we see, hear, and experience everything you're going through because we too are going through it. So what if we just take a pause and start taking perspective and looking for ways to show up for each other and then asking the others to help us? Because sometimes putting our hand out and asking for help, as well as showing up to help other people, they are both very healing And that is where the human connection is made, and that is where the human bonds are built. And it's a gender neutral, soul deep spiritual journey. So tap into that. The outer wrapping of our color, our height, our size, the place we go to worship, none of that matters. Beneath all of this, we're all the same. We each have a soul, we each have a spirit, and it's connected to a brain that is informing everything, and our body is chemistry. So can we please take a moment and connect with that reality and then show up every day to make a difference for ourselves and those around us, because those around us, whether we like it or not, they are our community. And what happens to them happens to us.